Our very special episode kicks off now. Now we're all warmed up, the throat's lean, we're ready to go. So if I wanted a practical guide to Azure Cognitive Services, where would I go and get that?
You'll be able to go to Amazon and find a freshly minted copy that takes you through the ins and outs of a fictitious seafood company, somewhat driven from my past experience being a CIO for a couple of seafood companies for a good chunk of time, almost 15 years probably between the two, and really taking us down opportunities for increasing customer satisfaction, optimizing operations, removing waste and cost, and some really fun stuff there. And again, this is 18 months in the making. 18 years would be a really long time.
Probably feels like it though, huh?
Yeah, it does at times. But it's been really great. I was actually approached originally about 2 years ago from Packt after one of my YouTube videos, strangely enough, a 5-minute video on Azure Cognitive Services, and they approached me about writing a book on it in more of a practical implementation guide, somewhat intermediate level, to be able to take those services and deploy them and some use cases on how they could be used.
Yeah. So I believe the company's name is Ocean Smart, right?
Correct.
Yep. So that's a great way to frame it. It's almost along the lines of the DevOps book, where we walked through that company and we had the stories of all the different types of personnel and how.
Oh, yeah.
So taking that approach really it was like I was hung on that concept of, it's almost like a Netflix series, right?
Yeah.
You get connected. It's not some abstract real company that you're thinking, oh yeah, having that, like, okay, here's this company, this is what their goals are, this is what their objectives are, really gets you connected, right? It's kind of like, you familiar with KnowBe4, the security training organization?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So KnowBe4, I'm addicted to KnowBe4 because of that mentality. It's like watching little movies, and this is the same approach. So I appreciate that approach.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's an awesome reference, actually. I mean, that I listened to that book on audio, and I mean, yeah, it just pulled you in, right? It was a great story. I would be tremendously just flattered if somebody made that comparison after they read this one, because I don't think I get to that level of storytelling and looping the themes together, because they really did want more of a practical guide to this. Sure. But it definitely does sort of look at the experiences I had over a long period of time, and both from a leadership position and understanding what the important things were to the businesses that I worked in, as well as understanding what the technical challenges were, and some of those discussion points when thinking about things like AI and ways that it could impact the business. It's not the easiest subject, and you have to be able to put some kind of visual around what you're trying to describe. And so I'm hoping that some of these chapters that were significantly longer than originally planned, and the amount of care and detail that I put into the writing, as well as the examples that my co-authors really helped with and helped build, two very close colleagues, another Microsoft colleague, as well as another gentleman I've worked with for many years, and really we wanted to make it real, and give the opportunity to provide some type of real world scenario. It is geared primarily toward manufacturing, but that doesn't mean that the use cases wouldn't apply across the board.
Yeah. Well, if you think of it, manufacturing facilities, they have accounting, they have HR, they have all the same components that every other organization has. So you need to solve for that, right? So if your product is turning out shrimp and seafood, and you're turning out widgets and metal parts. There's a lot of connections that can happen there, even through industry, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, I mean, it's a great point, because it where we do have, sort of that shop floor mentality in a couple of the chapters and the way we approach things, I think of specifically like the cognitive vision chapter, where we look at, the ability of running quality control against produced lobster tails, for instance, where we want to detect if a lobster tail is missing a flipper or has a crack or is discolored and things like that. And so that's very specific to manufacturing and sort of how you approach that. But then also, when you think about, we've got an anomaly detector chapter where we look at the freezer components and what it means if your freezer tolerances are out of range, and sort of how to measure that and set the ranges and all of the other components. When we look at an IoT capability and all of the things that you could slap an IoT device on for measuring vibration and heat and fan speeds and noises even, and all this other stuff that is really cool in the manufacturing environment. But then, we do a whole block in the book. It's 4 chapters of really just knowledge mining and, how can knowledge mining impact a company? And for those unaware, knowledge mining is sort of the next evolution of document management systems and enterprise search, kind of all in one, where, and those examples touch the whole business and sort of how to surface this dark data that is really plaguing a lot of organizations. Any research on dark data and the impact that it has on organizations, the estimated amount of dark data that most organizations have is like 70 to 80%, where, that could be really valuable information for, whether it be machine learning models or better ways to serve customers, or even setting up a graph between some of these documents and various assets, because it goes far beyond documents, right? We're talking media, we're talking images and all that kind of stuff as well. And some of the other chapters, chatbot with natural language and translation and those types of things, where you have that ability to work in a global environment. And I think what's important to realize for the consumers is that this could be as simple as a skunkworks project, right? Where you kind of throw some consumer grade things together to test it out, build a POC, play around. Most of the services have free tiers, right? Which kind of, nothing's ever free, right? But you got minimal storage costs, minimal networking costs, and stuff like that, right? And so you think about those types of things, and then you look at the broader picture and sort of how you can impact an organization more broadly as well.
For sure. So here's a question for you. So a lot of the times, it's maybe an organization wants to learn about this. They have a cursory understanding or a deep understanding, or like, okay, we want to go next level, and they pick up the book and they're going through it chapter by chapter, and then a thought will cross their mind, like, oh yeah, I'm just not going to put this in play in practicality because it's going to cost too much. You address that in the book, right?
Very much so. Just about every chapter, you're going to find, business objectives, business outcomes, and, TCO and ROI, total cost of ownership and return on investment. It's sort of the way that my brain works, especially in the seafood business. It's a very low margin business. And so, every penny kind of counts. And if you can make a case, to your boss or your boss's boss, as to what impact you feel this deployment or workload or whatever you want to call it is going to have on the business. If you can bring that out, I try to give a lot of hints on things you want to look at, right? I can't dictate what's going to happen in every situation, but very much concerned with how do we justify these types of activities? How do we make sure that we don't have cost overruns? How do we project out what it's going to cost for a full production workload, right? I try to cover all of those areas in varying depths depending on the chapter and things like that. But really those first few chapters focus on beyond the cognitive services, what are businesses doing? What are the additional Azure services beyond cognitive services that we're going to need to think about and implement as part of a solution? And so I really wanted to set the stage for people to understand, some of the challenges that Ocean Smart had. Some may be very, very much true to life, and some are a little bit more peripheral with my experience. But then, going deeper and looking at, trying to look at all the components there.
Yeah, for sure. So, understanding the components, understanding your data, understanding what potential solution targets there are. What about skills? What kind of skills is required for the reader of this book to practically implement one of these solutions?
It's funny because cognitive services always lands in the data and AI space from a bucketing category here at Microsoft, and you think of the Azure world and data and AI specialists and things like that. But in reality, the best skill you can have is probably like C# or Python, because there is a fair amount of code, knowledge and understanding around REST and calling REST APIs and understanding, the difference between the headers and the bodies and things like that. And having at least some understanding of Python or C#. We gear most of the chapters towards Python because it's kind of the most universal, I would say.
Yeah.
It's not an absolute, but I would say the majority of the services, support Python amongst C# and other languages as well. But there are, the services are all developed independently, right? And each of the product groups for each of the services has their own flavor of how they roll out the services and what languages they do support. So really, beyond that, working knowledge of Azure, how the portal works, how to get around navigation, your subscriptions, how a resource group works, I kind of lay those out just so people understand. We talk about some high availability stuff and various zones, and those types of things. But if you've got a foundation, at least in some Python programming or like I said, C#, have a basic knowledge of REST and how to use Postman to do some testing on REST, that's certainly going to help, and just kind of overall knowledge of Azure. The machine learning piece is taken care of for you, right? It's whether you're building a custom model, like I use the custom vision use case there. If I'm building that custom model, I'm walked through those steps with Microsoft, and I'm not dealing with the algorithms based on those models. And then as the tools mature, you get more visual editors, GUIs that are available to work with the different tools. But at the same time, they all have that code in the background. So, if you got to start on a custom vision service, customvision.ai, you could spin up your own custom vision model in a couple of hours.
Yeah. So if I were to recommend this book to say a VP of IT, a CIO, what are, I'm going to say top 3, but just if it's 1 or 5 or whatever, what are the top takeaways you want that more strategic, non-technical handed individual to pull from this? Because I believe that this is going to satisfy, again, the broader audience, but also the pinpoint data person or data scientist or tech. What's the key takeaways you want that business leader or that decision maker or somebody that says, I'm going to get my teams to look at this deeper?
Sure. Yeah. I think number 1 is definitely evaluating the value of implementing an AI solution, a cognitive service in your organization or a collection of cognitive services in your organization. Breaking down how to evaluate whether it will make the impact that they think it will, and then, sort of adjacent to that, whether you want to call it a second or a part B, is really being able to make your case one way or the other, right? I reference the phrase that I use frequently, in let's implement technology for the sake of technology, right? And I'm against that. People love technology, they love the new stuff, they love whiz bang. But if it doesn't provide the value that you can bring back to the organization, then it's probably not a great idea. If you're being forced to do it because somebody thinks it's going to provide that detail, I have a very sobering conversation that just says that's great. If you push back, it could be career suicide for that particular organization.
Yep.
So tread lightly, and make your case with data rather than emotion.
Yep. That's good point.
I think the scenarios that I put together can take you through different personas and where you sit, whether it's in finance or operations or IT or leadership, and being able to understand how to approach these various scenarios, from a technology and again value standpoint. I would say that's probably another great outcome, and then really ultimately giving you ideas about where there could be opportunity for this, right? Again, some of the scenarios are very, very, very much real life things that I faced and said, I bet we could do something with this, to somewhat a little bit out there, right? Where, the devil could be in the details for the implementation, but the idea is to just kind of spur any kind of thought around what you could use it for.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to segue a little bit into the experience of building this content for us to consume, right? This book is labor of love, as everybody says. What was the hardest thing about producing this book? And again, you have two other authors with you, right? So I'm sure the collaboration and the timing, I'm sure those challenges that's just the nature of having a day job and doing a book too, right?
Right.
But what was the most challenging part you found building this?
That was the hardest part, truthfully. It was the collaboration components of it. If I had the time and capacity to be able to do it all myself, I would have loved to, right? I would have loved to build the examples just how I had them in my head. Mm-hmm. I would have loved to take that time to provide those full solutions. But 18 months is a really long time when you think that originally they wanted it in 6 months, right? And so, the more people that get involved, the bigger the challenge, because, you've got, families and real work and all those types of things. That was pretty challenging. I had to be the whip cracker, and like I said, I did the majority of the writing, but sort of taking that vision and helping guide my co-authors through where I was trying to go with that. That was pretty challenging at times, because it was sort of a lot of stops and starts.
Sure.
And when I write my next book, I will.
So you're going to do it again? That was one of my questions.
It is a labor of love. I will say that the creative process, those days when you're just in flow state. I can remember one weekend I was working on it and I banged out like 1,500 words of just awesome material in like a couple hours time, and I was so on point. And then, there were other days I'd sit in front of a blank piece of paper for a couple hours, and so that writer's block is real. It can be very challenging. But I would say if anybody's even considering it, and actually Packt has a program where they'll recommend that you talk to another author, who's gone through the process. So I actually had a couple people reach out to me during the process to ask me, my thoughts on all that. And it was just that, set aside time every day, and dedicate that time every single day. Because honestly, even if you take a few days off, you kind of lose momentum. You lose your place. You have to kind of go back to where your thought process was, and all that kind of stuff. I will say, as a publisher, Packt did a really good job of giving me a bit of a North Star when it came to the chapters and the content. The original outline was a bit ambitious, I will say. It weren't quite able to pull through all of the examples that I originally had thought of and things like that. But it's when you dive deeper into the technology, you kind of understand the limitations of it, and so that was part of it. Part of it was just the practical nature. I mean, if we delivered the full original knowledge mining chapter that I wanted to, I mean, that chapter probably would have been 100 pages as opposed to 30 or 40 or whatever it is now.
It's its own book.
Yeah. I mean, the book was supposed to be originally 300. I think we ended at like 500 or something. So I write the same way I talk. I'm very verbose. And so yeah, it would definitely be to just set aside an hour a day, and then when you're in flow state, if you can do it, keep going.
Mm-hmm. Which chapter was your favorite?
Oh boy,
like it's almost like at this point it's an unfair question. It's like saying who's your favorite kid, right?
No, I mean, I would say probably the custom vision, because I primarily built that. I built the model, I trained the model, I set up the whole example, so I kind of did that chapter start to finish, except for the last portion. One of my colleagues kind of tied in the API and calling the API and stuff like that. But for the most part, I mean, I'd say that one gave me the most satisfaction because I was able to dig into the tech and come back to my tech roots a little bit, and that one was pretty fun to put together. It was also one of the first ones that we finished, so it was kind of like that sense of pride and accomplishment from it. So I mean, I'd say that one, and really those examples are true every day, so just a DIY home example, right? If you wanted to do your own DIY using AI to detect whether your garage door was open, I mean, obviously there are other systems that can do that, but I mean, being able to compare an image of a closed door versus an open door, being able to accommodate various stages of light throughout the day or darkness, and being able to accommodate all those types of things, you could do it. You could take various pictures and sort of build your model, and then all the capabilities are there to be able to send a notification through Service Bus or whatever, right?
But the logic app to shut the door because it should be shut.
Precisely, right? Or prompt you on a Power App to say, do you want to shut the door, right? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that one was pretty cool. Overall, we built a full portal for all of the examples. So going through and designing that and what the user experience would be like, albeit rudimentary, right? Nothing sure. Crazy, but we use a Django portal that basically taps into all the services. We're sort of trying to come up with a way to facilitate users and readers of the book to be able to play with those examples. Mm-hmm. The challenge with that, of course, is how do you avoid cost overruns in the Azure environment and stuff like mm-hmm. that. And so we haven't quite nailed down the exact approach, but we do have a portal that users can use, and we have some screenshots and stuff like that. Plus, all the code will be available. So if you wanted to deploy your own Django yep. portal along those lines, you could.
Yeah, and I think one of the things it's good about your approach and not just the chapter outline and the storytelling, it's beyond that, right? So it's in the title, it's practical, right? So way back in the day when Raspberry Pis and Arduinos came out, I'm a big IoT guy, right? You mm-hmm. would get that, here's this big book, and you get your Raspberry Pi and you're like, plug this one LED in,
right.
And then when you're done with the chapter, you lit the LED up, and then you're sitting there, you're like, now the next now go light Shea Stadium, or go turn right. on, I'm dating myself by talking about Shea Stadium, but it's kind of like that. There's like a disconnect between real world and being yeah. able to interface with something at a basic level. Yeah. And the way that the story is told is, it throws a reader right into a real world situation that they can extrapolate to themselves, but then they get connected to, get connected to Ocean and what's going to happen and how we're going to, make things better. So that approach is like, that's brilliant. It's the next step, right?
Yeah. I mean, if we come around to doing a version 2 of the book, to update, some of the changes to the service and stuff, I definitely identified some areas where, might be able to expand on the story or, maybe build a better example and things like that. But at this point, we've got working examples. We've got, a good story. I'm obviously going to be my own biggest critic. But I definitely have identified as I'm going through the final editing process where it's like, okay, you know what, if we do a Rev 2 of this, I can probably elaborate further and immerse the reader a little deeper into those scenarios.
So this is going to be such a loaded question. So the fictitious organization Ocean Smart, is it the next Kintoso?
What's funny is there is a company, I believe it's a software company that called Ocean Smart. I realized after the fact. So I don't think so.
Okay.
But again, it was something we made up on the fly, and we make it very clear that it's a fictitious company, and any personas that are described are not about any one person. It's kind of my opportunity to make these amalgamated personas as we're going through that that process of understanding the use case.
Yeah, so the next book then, the Ocean Smart has to get acquired by something you can use for the next 10 books.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Just keep the next book talk down. My wife is ready to kill me for the first book, so she's already made it very clear that book number 2 is going to be a ways off.
Absolutely. Well, you just got to promise me when this hits the the top New York Times top list that I can be the MC the event for it. So I'll fly out there.
Fantastic. I'll do a book signing right there in Pittsburgh.
That's awesome. Anything else that runs subtext? I'm going to qualify this in a second, but subtext in the book. I know that I know how your brain works because I've known you for long enough. There's always those little bits of Azure, the things that aren't necessarily in the title of the book. Is there any subtext in here that is, that maybe, again, a leader, CTO, a director, they're looking at this, they know enough. They're like, okay, well, here's these other things that we talk about in Azure that maybe I need to look at. Is there any kind of tangential or subtext tech that you talk about?
I would say the theme that comes to mind most is keep it simple, stupid, right? Start simple. And I mean, I work with my customers the exact same way. Start simple, start small, gain some momentum, implement something that works, show the value, and then get the whole organization behind it, right? Get that, really, like I said, display that value to the business and help them realize where you can go with it, right? And so if you can be a storyteller along with a technologist, it's gonna really help you, your career, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, so we know that you talk about GPT-4, some of the AI capabilities. We got to somehow weasel that into the title of the show, just because everybody's searching for that right now. So maybe we'll get a little bit of an extra runway there.
And I as I was writing that, it was tough because stuff was changing every day. And even after the first draft of the OpenAI chapter was done, more information was coming out, right? Yeah. And so you got to stop at some point, right? I mean that's the nature of technology. And I remember very early in the process, my first editor that I was working with, he's just like, look, it's going to continue to change. It's going to continue to evolve. There's nothing you can do about it. Just hopefully there aren't major changes that make whatever you're writing about completely irrelevant, right? In our chatbot and natural language processing / translator chapter, Microsoft was going through this transition of Lewis to language understanding, and they are different. Right. Even though it's not, Lewis is short for language understanding, blah, blah, blah. They are different. And the Lewis service is somewhat being put out to pasture in the long game, right? I think 2025 is when it starts to, start being shut off or kind of thing. So there's plenty of time, plenty of runway, but they hadn't yet integrated the language understanding components into the bot framework yet, right? And so that was redundant. And so we reference it and are able to at least speak to language understanding from what we could, but that direct integration wasn't there yet. Now, mind you, it'll be roughly the same process, right? But you gotta pull out Lewis, put in language understanding, and you might have to do a little bit of poking around to find the exact thing that you're looking for. That's certainly a challenging thing. But with the OpenAI and ChatGPT, working with the editors, the product manager, and things like that, it was clear that we really had to do something with it, right? And at first it was like, man, I'm just trying to get this thing off my desk, and he's just like, look, there's so much demand for this. Let's be one of the first books out there with some real detail on it, and so there we go.
Yep. Well, being a front runner and having the understanding of the tech that you do makes it easy to be a leader in the space. So, I'm hoping our listeners will, key in, get the book, connect, communicate, collaborate, do whatever you got to do to help your organization out, and use this as a resource to spring yourself forward on the backs and knowledge of Chris and his co-authors too, as well. Is there any? Sorry.
And I would say, to that point, if there are areas of improvement, talk about it. Let us know, right? If you've got suggestions for Rev 2, tell me. You know what I mean? Like how can we improve it? How can we provide what you'd find more valuable? And help us make it better, and help us help you, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So technically, I think we covered some good concepts. We covered the way the book's laid out. What we didn't cover out is any shout outs. I obviously your family gets the first shout out, I'm sure. I'm speaking for you. I know you. But Is there any shout outs for the support and to make this a reality for you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so my co-authors, obviously they put a lot of time and effort into it, and we've put together what we believe is a really good opportunity for people to learn and implement these technologies. So I definitely would be remiss if I didn't mention them. And really just working for Microsoft, that affords me that ability to help our customers, right? And being able to tap into resources here that maybe a non-employee wouldn't be able to get to, right? And being able to leverage the smart people I work with, to really get a good handle on, what the intent of the service is, or some of the capabilities. Actually have several reviewers from Microsoft that did technical reviews of the chapters, and things like that. So, my colleagues were excellent, really, really supportive. And of course, my family has been tremendous.